Why hasn't that worked?
First on BBC One.
Hello and welcome to the History CV of Britain. My name's Paul, your host. Today we're going to be discussing early Christianity in Britain again with my very special guest, Marcel Abrahams. This actually could be episode 5, part 2. I'm not sure really. I'll let you decide. Before I bring Marcel on, I just wanted to introduce 4 books to you that I've mentioned many times on this channel. This is the 4-part trilogy that Ralph Ellis has produced on the historical Jesus, and anyone who's interested in this subject, this really is essential reading. Okay, so this is the first book. Sorry about the reverse image. So this is Cleopatra to Christ. That's the very first book in the 4-part trilogy. Jesus was the great grandson of Cleopatra the 7th, and I think that's Cleopatra of Selene, and we have depictions of Cleopatra from places like Pompeii that were drawn around 50 to 60 years after her life, or after she died, and she had ginger hair. So that's something to keep on top of as we go through all this history. We mentioned the red hair last week in the show. The second book is called King Jesus. Here we are here. This book resolves the greatest intellectual mystery and global quest of all time, the true origins of Christianity. And in this book, I think, if I remember rightly, this is the book where Ralph conflates the characters Saul and Josephus Flavius. So Ralph, and he's produced much evidence for this, obviously. So as you can see, it's a very thick book. Ralph states in this book that Saul and Josephus Flavius were in fact the same person. They shared the same publisher, and they were on the same shipwreck, which was off of Malta. And there's all sorts of connections with those two characters. So that is Ralph's ID. The third book, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. This is Jesus, King of Adessa. Now, I want everyone who's watching to have a good look at the front cover of this book, because this is pertinent to what I'm going to show you in a few moments' time once Marcel's with us. Have a look at this guy. This is King Isas Manu VI of Adessa. Okay, have a little look at what he's wearing, because that's very important for what I'm about to show you. And the last book in the 4-part trilogy is the Grail Cipher. Another huge book, fantastic book. The history of King Arthur was modelled upon the life of Jesus. Jesus / Arthur had 12 disciple knights of the round Last Supper table. Okay, so these are brilliant books. I can't recommend them enough. Anyone interested in the historical Jesus needs to read them. I think you can find them on EdFu Books, if you don't like shopping with Amazon. So there we are. So without further ado, I know you're all waiting for Marcel, so I'm going to bring her straight on. So here she is. Hello, Marcel.
Hello again.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Nice to be back.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So We discussed lots of things last week on Sunday's show. I really want to get on to St. Paul evangelizing in Britain. So I think, if you don't mind, I'll start with that question. So, in your opinion, according to your own research, Marchell, did St. Paul visit Britain?
Short answer, yes. To accept that, you have to accept that there's an act of the apostles missing. Whether it was taken out of the Bible or left out deliberately, we don't know. But in the 1800s, there was a piece, sorry, what's the, a bit of parchment, which was given to an Englishman by the then Sultan of Turkey. And this man was called Sonnini. Doesn't sound very English, does he? But anyway, it's known as the Sonnini Manuscript. Oh, translated by Sonnini. From an original manuscript found in the archives of Constantinople and presented to him by the Sultan Abdul Ahmed. So that was in the 1800s, about 1830-ish, I think.
Okay.
And what it purports to be is the long-lost chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 29.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing about this is that it's been examined by, for example, the Covenant Press and also biblical scholars, and they reluctantly agree that from the internal evidence, it's very likely that it is the missing chapter, because Acts of the Apostles is one of only two New Testament books that doesn't end with Amen. And the Acts 29, and I'll read the relevant verses if I may.
Yes.
29 does end with Amen. It's also, from the internal evidence, very similar in tone and style to the rest of the Acts of the Apostles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tremendous find, and you will find some biblical scholars who accept that it is the missing chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can't do any better than to read it's verses 7 to 15. If I can read them.
Yes, please.
Paul has been preaching mightily in Spain, and verses 7 to 15 are the relevant ones. And they departed out of Spain, and Paul and his company, finding a ship in Armorica, that's Brittany, sailing unto Britain, they went therein, and passing along the south coast, they reached a port called Raphinus. Well, Raphinus was the old name for Sandwich in Kent. I've done a lot of work on that as well. It's all to do with the Isle of Thanet, which the Britons used to call Ruin. And that was the gateway, the port. It was considered to be part of London. And the river that divides Thanet from the mainland, the River Wansum, was considered to be part of the Thames. And I can go into all that another time. But anyway, so Raphinus was Sandwich. Now, when it was noised abroad that the apostle had landed on their coast, great multitudes of the inhabitants met him, and they treated Paul courteously, and he entered in at the east gate of their city and lodged in the house of an Hebrew and one of his own nation. And on the morrow he came and stood upon Mount Lud, that of course is in London, where St. Paul's Cathedral was built. And the people thronged at the gate and assembled in the Broadway, and he preached Christ unto them, and many believed the word and testimony of Jesus. And that's the next few verses are concerned with his teachings. And I'll go to verse 13. And it came to pass that certain of the Druids came unto Paul privately, and showed by their rites and ceremonies they were descended from the Jews which escaped from bondage in the land of Egypt. And the apostle believed these things, and he gave them the kiss of peace. And Paul abode in his lodgings 3 months, confirming in the faith and preaching Christ continually. And after these things, Paul and his brethren departed from Raphinus and sailed unto Actium in Gaul, France, obviously. I haven't been able to find where Actium is, but I can tell you that for 1,000 years there was a little mud hut down in the old part of Sandwich, Rufinus, which was called the House of the Apostles. And everybody came who came to this country to preach. Paul, Aristobulus, who was Aristlihen, and Simon Zelotes, I think, came here as well. They stayed at the House of the Apostles, and that place was still standing 1,000 years ago.
Wow, amazing!
And that's like courtesy of the Covenant Press, because I haven't found that elsewhere. So that's
yes, if I remember rightly, Simon Zealots ended up in Lincoln. I've read that somewhere.
Yes, yes,
martyred there.
I believe he did, but he came to a sticky end, like most of them.
Have you ever come across? Sorry to interrupt you, Marshall. Have you ever come across the idea or theory that St. Peter was in York?
No, I haven't.
That's something that I'm pretty sure Conwyn's Beaumont talks about, because obviously he places all the Bible events in England.
Yes.
Which
no, that I didn't know. I've got Conwyn's Beaumont's books. I'll have to have another look. I just thought I would rather like to read what Covenant Press. I've just printed out this thing for my inconvenience. What the Covenant Press actually say about it, about Acts 29. It has all the appearance of being of ancient date. It is written in Greek and in the style of the Acts. The places and peoples mentioned are called by their ancient or Roman names. Its tone is dignified and spiritual. Its scriptural brevity, the remarkable character of its prophetic expressions, its having been preserved in the archives of Constantinople. Not quite sure why that should testify to its genuineness or not, but Covenant Press seem to think it does. And its pure gospel character and generous conception of the divine purpose and plan. But me being rather a skeptical sort of person, what really does it for me is the internal evidence, how like the rest of the Acts of the Apostles it is in style. And also that missing amen does it for me.
Okay.
So yes, he was here, and probably more than once, because like Jesus, Paul had, I think, 6 missing years where we're not sure what he was up to.
Yes.
And if this Acts 29 was left out of the Bible, well, it explains very nicely what he was doing, because he was sort of European globetrotting,
yes.
Spain, Gaul, here and wherever.
So he was travelling around a lot, and I'm very convinced that he came. Swear, that's my cat. Very convinced that he came to Britain, which leads me to ask you, what's your opinion on the language that he would have been preaching in? How would Englanders been, how would they have understood him?
Well, if he could converse, that's a brilliant question, but if he could converse with Druids, it does say they showed by their rites and ceremonies that they were descended from the Jews, but there must have been conversation between them. It's rather like, how did Brutus converse with the British inhabitants who were already here when he arrived? There can't have been all that much difference in the language. You might remember that Alan Wilson once said, when he was a boy in South Wales,
yes,
the Brecon onion sellers could speak with the Glamorgan people, and the languages weren't all that different. I don't know what it's like now. Now that the language in Glamorgan, according to Ross, has changed quite a lot. But he might have spoken in Greek. There would have been plenty of educated people in London who would have understood him. He, as we know, he spent a time at the Palatium Britannicum in Rome with the British royal family, which is a little bit later than this, or about 50 AD, 50-ish AD, so round about the same time. Whether he would have spoken the British tongue to them that we call Welsh, a 2,000-year-old version of it. Wow. He might have conversed with them in Greek. They were highly civilized people. They'd have spoken both languages, I would imagine.
Yes.
But I'm not an expert in that, so that's pure speculation on my part.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. Okay. On that note, shall I bring up the genealogy again, R.W. Morgan?
Oh, yes, do.
We'll have a look at that, and then we can get stuck into these characters that are around St. Paul at the time. So I'll just share screen for a moment. Bear with me. Hopefully now everyone can see the genealogy on screen.
That's a bit small, actually. I'll see if I can find my own.
Well, I'll call these names out as we go along. So we've pretty much covered Joseph of Arimathea coming to Britain in the late AD 30s, probably. And now we move on to a lady called Claudia.
Yes.
Who was
just one minor point, Paul. He'd have been Joseph of Arimathea would have been here in the very early part of the 1st century, because he brought Jesus here as a boy as well.
Yes, okay, that ties in with Edmund Marriage's research as
Yes.
well. So yes, he may have gone.
Claudia.
Claudia, the daughter of Caractacus or Caradoc.
I tend to use the Welsh name. That's only because I've been indoctrinated by Wilson and Blackhead. I could do a lot worse. Yes, this is really, really interesting because, hold on, let me find my own notes on it. Claudia was her Caradoc's daughter, or one of them, and her name was actually Gladys.
Oh, right.
But she was taken as a ward by Claudius. Now, this is really unusual because I can't find a single instance of a female being taken ward by a Roman emperor. I looked it up. All the wards taken were male, and Claudia seems to be the only female one, which must make her bloodline, maybe she herself, of really supreme significance. So that's most unusual. And she took the Roman name of Claudia in his honor. And as I've said here, Roman emperors frequently adopted boys, but never girls. And for Claudius to adopt her in this fashion must mean that she and her family were noble, rich, as we know they were royal, and important enough for him to desire either to exploit her and the British royal family, or to protect them, or to somehow use the connection for tactical political reasons, which I haven't yet discovered. This was so unusual that must have been a really important tactical reason behind it. That was my reasoning.
Okay.
And it implies, I've put here, that in some way Caradoc was in with Claudius, invader of Britain. She married a fellow called Aulus Rufus Putens, who was related to Claudius, and which cemented a relationship between the families still further. But yes, so that it looks as though there was some private treaty going on behind the scenes.
Okay. Right, brilliant. Okay, so we've got Claudia here. So I'll just take that off the screen, or bring it back up rather. And then we've got so she's married to Rufus Pudens. I take it, according to this genealogy, it looks as though she's related to or is the sister of Silenus, Sinon, Linus, who we say is the first bishop of Rome.
That's right, yes.
And Urgain.
Yes. Well, Jürgen was one of her sisters.
Jürgen.
And it's a little complicated because Jürgen was also the name of Caradoc's sister, who's not on there, but she was the first ever to be baptized Christian, and she invited Paul over to Britain to meet the family and to baptize her. And Cor Jürgen is still to be found somewhere not far from Cardiff.
So, sorry, how do you pronounce that again? Jürgen?
I think it's Jürgen.
Jürgen, okay.
There were two of them. One was Caradoc's sister, and the other one was Gladys, Claudia's sister. So Caradoc had a sister called Jürgen and also a daughter called Jürgen.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, it says here on the genealogy, Jürgen equals Salog. Now, I'm not sure what.
Salig, yes,
Salig.
she married him.
Ah.
Oh no, I didn't realise you were going to ask me that. Otherwise, I'd have done some research into it. Lord of Salig, he was called, and he fits in, funnily enough, with Simon Zelotes.
Oh, okay.
But I can't recall off the top of my head because it's a long time since I was looking into that.
Interesting. Okay, I'll look into that as well. Brilliant. And basically, if I think I'm right in saying that all these people were eventually martyred in Rome, weren't they?
Claudia was not. Claudia was fated, F-E circumflex T-E-D, by the Etruscan poet Martial, red-haired Claudia, and she had 4 children: Timotheus, Novatus, Pudentiana, and Praxedes, and the 2 last were girls.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not sure what happened to Timotheus and Novatus, but the 2 girls were really, really interesting. Pudentiana and Praxedes, so Caradoc's granddaughters,
Yes.
they are thought to have gathered up the bones of the Christian martyrs burned by Nero, and they buried them with their own hands. Now, where the British royal family stayed on the Esquiline Hill, near the baths of Novatus, they were called, that was the Palatium Britannicum. It was a kind of British embassy, and Paul stayed there, and that's where Caradoc and his family lived for the 7 years until he went back to Cardiff. And I found recently, and I was exceedingly lucky to find it again from my from Gaian Books in New Delhi. It's a slim little thingy, and it's called the House of Pudens in Rome, and it's all about the building itself, the Palatium Britannicum. And I've never been there, and I'd absolutely love to go. But this says that there are bits of the actual Palatium Britannicum which are still visible to this day. And if you care to Google it, it's called Santa Pudenziana now. It's a church.
Right. Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
You see, the roof of it is at street level, indicating its antiquity, and you have to go down a flight of steps to get to it. It's 40 or 50 feet below street level. And that's the site of the Palatium Britannicum. Well, Santa Pudenziana, the church, the Basilica of Santa Pudenziana was constructed over the ruins of it. And not far away is another basilica called Santa Prassede, for Praxedes, her sister. And they were, they're in the Roman martyrology because they were martyred. I haven't got a copy of that, but that's what happened to them. Now, their uncle, Linus, was the very first bishop of Rome. Oh, and also the Palatium Britannicum was used as a kind of Vatican from 50, whatever it was. When did Caradoc get to Rome? About 52 AD. It was used as a kind of Vatican, a headquarters for Christianity, right up until Constantine invented, and I'm sure people are going to get cross with me for saying this, but he more or less invented the Roman Catholic religion at the Council of Nicaea by deciding what everybody ought to believe, because it was a tool of power for him to wield over the empire. But that, for the first, let us say, 200 years, the Palatium Britannicum was the Vatican until it moved. And Linus was the first bishop of Rome in, I think it was 67 to 76 AD. He was Caradoc's son. And if you look on a Wikipedia list of popes, it says that Peter the Apostle was the first bishop of Rome, but I'm afraid that's wishful thinking. It's nonsense. It was decided 200 years later that the Apostle Peter ought to displace Linus, and B, he was an apostle, which meant he went about evangelizing, and it's doubtful that he was ever even in Rome.
Yes. Yeah. Brilliant.
So that's them. Timotheus is mentioned in the Bible, and this, of course, is contested by the experts. But it's in 2 Timothy, right at the very end. Do thy duty. He's mentioned by Paul. So, gosh, I ought to have got that reference ready for you. I can't find it, but it's in the second book of Timothy.
Brilliant.
Second letter of Timothy.
Okay. So, shall we just briefly move down on the genealogy? So, roughly in the middle, you can see there we've got Claudia and her brothers and sisters. To the left, we've got Rufus Padunes, her husband. Now, the next one down is Solinus, and their child was Cole, AD 120. Is that the Cole of the nursery rhyme, Marcia?
I believe it is.
Mhm.
Coil is as in Coil Bren, it turns up over and over again in the British genealogies. And there were 2 quite close together. I can't quite see what that says. Does it say Helen beneath it?
So we've got Cole AD 120, and below Cole we've got Lucius or Livermois, who was the king that set up the British Church, I think.
Oh, right, that Coil, yes. Now
Yes.
that's what I mean. There were 2 quite close together.
Yes.
And we need Alan Wilson. I think the first one, the older one, is Coil, and I don't know how to pronounce his Welsh name, Göteborg, which Alan Wilson translates as hairy trousers. And
Wow.
now, which of them is Coil Hen, Old King Cole? I don't know. It might have been Helena's father, or it might have been the earlier one. That's one thing. Do you know there are only 2 books written about Helena? I proposed to write a biography of her myself, but there are only 2 books written about her. One was by Evelyn Waugh, and the other was a play by Dorothy L. Sayers. Both really good in their separate ways, but they look at it, of course, from the Roman point of view. So although one learns quite a lot, one doesn't learn anything about the actual families because it's not looked at from the British point of view.
Okay.
I hope to go into that in more depth. Queen Absolute, it's going to be called, the biography of Helena. Nobody's written about her.
Wow, look forward to that. Brilliant. Okay, so as I say, we're coming down to Lucius, who was the British king that set up the church in this country.
Yes.
We've also got just underneath Lucius, we've got Cadvan equals Gladys. Now you mentioned Gladys earlier, but that was Claudia, wasn't it? So
gosh, you see now I use Alan Wilson's genealogy for this part of the family, and it is slightly different.
Right, okay.
And it hasn't got as many oh gosh, now I can't find it. It hasn't got as many names on it as the Morgan one has.
Okay, not to worry. I think Edmund Marriage has done a kind of an updated version of this genealogy by R.W. Morgan, so I'll have to try and get a copy.
Oh yes,
yeah.
I've been equating Lud backwards for reasons which I think we're going to talk about.
Yes.
Using Percy Enderby's Cambria Triumphans and the Brute, and also Geoffrey of Monmouth.
Okay.
And it's there are a number of discrepancies, but it's there are fewer discrepancies than there are correlations, and it just goes to show that you need to write things down basically, because for trying to do all this by memory, people's memories go. And I'm glad that somebody wrote it down. So if we ever are able to get to a more accurate genealogy of this extraordinarily important part of the Loygrian royal family, well, that would be fantastic. But I think it's going to take quite a lot of work.
Yes,
Digging
certainly.
it all up, and then we have to correlate it with known records, and then there are all the records that we don't know about.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm trying to sort of move my way down to Helen. We're almost there now. So underneath Gladys and Cadvan, Prince of Cambria, we've got Strada the Fair equals Cole, King of Colchester, AD 232. Now I'm thinking that might be, is that the Cole of the nursery rhyme?
I think it is. It's the one above. It says here Helen, who married Constantius and had Constantine the Great. So her father was Coil, King of Colchester. But as I say, I don't know which of them was called Coil Hen.
Okay.
Oh, King Cole. I don't know which of them was the one that survives in the nursery rhyme.
Okay. Well, in your book Migrations, you accept the claim that the mother of Constantine the Great was Helen of Colchester. Edward Gibbon, who I think was a historian in the 18th century, so among many others, he thought that she was a Club Med barmaid. So
Well,
what do you make of this extraordinarily discrepant reading of our history, Marcia?
The best thing I can do is to read out what I jotted down when you sent me your questions. What do I make of it? Only that Gibbon, like all men of his era and afterwards who were educated in the classics, was unconsciously biased towards the Roman tradition. To advance an unsubstantiated opinion on Helena's birth, as Gibbon did, and to ignore the evidence from your own British history, indicates that mixture of untrammeled imagination allied to a rigidly closed mind, which I've often deplored. Sorry, it's rather hard-hitting, but I have a name for this sort of rather high-minded dismissal of the British records. It's called academic snottery.
Very good.
But I think by then the Enlightenment had done a lot of damage to a lot more damage to our British history, which had already begun to decline seriously when Cambria Triumphans was published in 1661. Percy Enderby was deploring our lack of knowledge. In fact, that's one reason why he wrote Cambria Triumphans, was to try and redress the balance. But Nennius, back in the 800s, he was as I say in the Great Migrations, he was even then lamenting the dullness of the British, who'd forgotten who they are. So we've got a lot of work to do uncovering all this stuff. Where, as I keep saying, we're still very, very much in the foothills. A lot to discover, rediscover, and stick back together.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've both got something to offer today on the historical Jesus character. Would you like to go first, or shall I go first? I don't mind.
Oh, you go first. You go first. It's your show.
Right. Okay. I'll just take that off the screen, and then I'll show you something. So there we go. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. I like the elephants very much.
Yes. So this is. Sorry. Go on.
No. I just yes. I'm seeing H's and
yes
and animals and things. Tell me more.
Okay. Well, this is the Hucock mosaic, which was discovered and dug up in an ancient Jewish synagogue about 3 miles inland from the Sea of Galilee.
Oh yes.
Now, what are we looking at here? We're looking at a king, and we know he's a king. The guy on the right, that is, so the guy in armor here.
Yes.
He's wearing a Jewish diadem, I think it's called, and he's got a Jewish side lock of hair as well.
Oh, yes, the aggrawator, yes.
That's right. Okay. Now, somehow, the person in charge of this dig, the archaeologist, I'm struggling to remember her name now, this was discovered about 15 to 20 years ago, if I remember rightly.
Right.
She claims that this is Alexander the Great, which I find to be extremely unlikely, given the fact that we've just mentioned he's got a side lock of hair and he's got a diadem. Okay, so this is a king, and he's presenting a calf, as you can see there,
yes,
to the high priest of Jerusalem.
Yes.
Okay, so this is, I believe, and this is Ralph Ellis's work, this is the guy that I mentioned to you last week, Monobazus II, the only king, that translates as, of Adiabeni.
Oh, right.
We're saying that Adiabeni is Adessa because nobody has discovered the location of Adiabeni. It was supposed to be beyond the Euphrates. That's how it's described. And if you go beyond the Euphrates, you pretty quickly end up in Adessa. Okay. So in the Talmud, this is Bar Kamsa. Okay. So
Right.
Bar Kamsa is presenting an imperfect sacrificial calf because you can see, I don't know if you can see where my cursor is, but there's
Yeah,
a blemish. There's a blemish on the calf. So this is actually an insult. What he's doing here, it's actually an insult. And this is how Bar Kamsa, aka Monobazus, precipitated the Jewish revolt of AD 70.
Oh, what a wicked thing to do. How clever. Yes.
Okay, well, this is all in the Talmud, by the way, and the Jews in the Talmud have nothing nice to say about this character whatsoever. They despise him. Okay, and Bar Kamsa, incidentally, means son of the locust, and the Edessan kings were described as locusts.
Really?
Yes, they were hated. Now, this dates back to the 4th century, officially speaking, but I believe it could well be earlier than that. So we could be looking potentially here at the historical Jesus character. Notice the red hair.
Yes.
And notice the purple cloak. Okay. And
yes.
this is typical Edessan army wear, if you like, what he's got on there. Okay. I'll just flick this on. I think I'm going to go the right way. Yes. Now, this is the cover of the 3rd book that Ralph did, Jesus, King of Adessa. Now, this book cover and the book itself was published 5 years before the Huqoq mosaic was discovered, and you can immediately see that there's a very strong likeness.
Yes, indeed.
Between the two characters. Also, if notice here the helmet that he's wearing, this is a crown of thorns.
Good gracious, yes.
And the Edessan crown was it, and we've got coins and stuff. I'll show you one in a minute. Their crown was like a crown of thorns, which is very, very interesting. And I'll just finish up with one more image, which I think I'm going to have to go back. Bless you, 2 pages.
I'm always sneezing on your show. I'm sorry.
I won't take it personally. Okay, so here is a coin of Monobazus II. And there's his crown, the crown of thorns.
Yes.
You can see the Jewish side lock of hair tailing off there on the left-hand side. So I just thought that's all very interesting, you know.
Paul, when would he have found the time to be king of Adessa? I mean, I know we're missing 18 years of his life. How does that fit in with the time scale for Monobazus II?
Well, Monobazus II was the leader of the Jewish revolt, according to Josephus Flavius. He names him, and one other character. There were 2 characters. Monobazus was one of them. And Adiabeni, according to Ralph, is Adessa. So they're the same place. So the timeline matches up in that respect. These characters were around at exactly the same time. So you would obviously have to read the books, because Ralph presents so much more evidence. So I'm just giving you a very basic overview of all this. But I do think there's definitely something going on there.
There was a church at Adessa, wasn't it? One of the original?
Yes, I think I'm right in saying the earliest Christian Orthodox church in the world is in Adessa.
Yes.
Jesus's twin brother, Thomas Didymus, something or other, he was the guy that went to Kashmir and set up a church in India in around the AD 50s.
And also in Kerala.
Yes.
The Kerala Christians call themselves the St. Thomas Christians. They call themselves Ras Nazrani, which has implications for the Etruscan name. Actually, they call themselves Rasna.
Right, okay.
And
yes,
of course,
I remember you saying that before, yeah. And St. Thomas was his remains when he died. They were sent back to Adessa, and where he's buried. So there's an awful lot going on with it.
Oh, crumbs, isn't there?
As I've said before, if there's any way we can match this history up of Ralph's with the history we're discussing at the moment, that would be fantastic. Because I do think
I go back to something I said last week. That lost period of Christ's life was not well. Yes, I suppose the deafening silence covers up. It was covering up something that he was doing of real importance. And how we find out, I don't know, but I'll certainly read Ellis's book, definitely.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yes.
So your turn. So you've got some news for us. I think you've been very busy this week.
It's baffled me how Jesus can fit in with the British royal family. Fit in, he seems to, but how? And I started digging a little bit, and he seems to have been born in 5 BC, and his mother was about 15 or 16 when she had him. So that takes us back to 20, does it? Gosh, my maths. Say 20, let's say 25 BC. Okay. And her father was said to have been, oh yes, now because he was, this is how things are in the Christian religion. He was said to be the son of God. He did not have a mortal man for his father, so his genealogy goes back through his mother, not through Joseph, because Joseph was not his father. So, and there's lots of lovely debates going on about that, and there have been for the last 2,000 years. But in Luke, it says that Mary's father, it says Joseph's father, as it is supposed, was a fellow called Healy.
Oh.
And but the as it is supposed is it's a sop to the Jews who would not have accepted that Jesus was born of a virgin birth. So it isn't actually Joseph's genealogy at all, it's Mary's. So It was Mary who was the daughter of Healy. And Healy, or Heli, is supposed to have been a very, very old man when she was born. And that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, because if you go back, let us say 50 years, so he sired Mary when he was 70. It's perfectly possible. Also have gone way, way back, married young as they tended to, and had children at the beginning of his life when he was 20-ish. So 50 years between them. Right. I thought, why does that ring a bell? That rings a bell. I know that there's a British king of that name who is most mysterious in the British records. And he was at the right time. And so I went back and I had a look, and it's Lud's father, who is called Healy.
Yes, yes.
You remember we touched on this, and I thought it might have been the same as Belimar. It isn't. I got that completely wrong. But the thing about Healy is that what's his name? Enderby in Cambria Triumphans says that he nothing is known of him, absolutely nothing, except that he ruled for a year. In the Brute, he's called Ely or Eli, and he reigns for about 7 months.
Right.
Geoffrey of Monmouth gives him a 40-year reign, but also gives reign to his imagination, which Geoffrey was quite prone to do, as we know. And again, actually nothing concrete is known about this man whatsoever. Now, if you look at, I don't know if you've got a copy of Cambria Triumphants, have you?
Unfortunately not, no.
You must go to Barn Books and get a copy of this.
I've made a note of that. I'm going to do just that.
Brilliant. I can't live without it.
I bet, yeah.
Enderby goes into all the genealogies of the kings, and he's meticulous about it.
Wow.
And he gives achievements. He gives what the king's character was like, and particularly if the king had a long reign, there's much more to be known about him. Well, if if Geoffrey of Monmouth had been right with his 40-year reign, there'd have been something known about this man, Healy, and there isn't. Not a sausage. We don't even know if he died or whether he was deposed. Anyway, so he was on the throne, let us say, a year. I tend to go with not with Geoffrey on this, although Geoffrey doesn't get anything wrong, and also he was just translating the Bruticilio, as we know.
Yes.
But he Healy is exactly the right age, not only to have had his 3 sons, Lud, Cassibelan, and crumbs, I've forgotten the other one yet again.
There's only 2 sons mentioned on the genealogy.
Yeah, but there are more in here.
Okay.
And so he's perfectly of an age to have, let us say, deposed an unsatisfactory father, Healy, who might well have made his way out to the Holy Land and produced Mary when he was an old man.
Right, okay.
There's one enormous stumbling block to this, which is the discrepancy between the biblical names for Mary's genealogy and the Loigrian genealogy of kings. But again, I mean, I only found this a couple of days ago, as you know, sent you the email. It's perfectly possible that Healy could have been deposed by Lud and had gone off to try his fortune somewhere else. It happened. Ruallan did the same thing. He was Lear's grandson by Regan, and it's from he went off to try his fortune, and from him Brutus descended.
Wow. Okay. It's just triggered something in my mind going back to Joseph and Mary. I seem to remember that Edgar Casey wrote about this, and he said that the age difference between Joseph and Mary was so vast that when they were married, there were people in the crowd sniggering, basically, because he was old enough to be at least her father or something.
Yeah.
So that correlates definitely.
Well, yes, and if she had but maybe she was happier with an older man. I mean, if she was the daughter of a much older man, it might have seemed quite natural to her.
Yes.
And also, we have to remember that women, even princesses, did not have the disposing of their own futures. It was decided for them by the men.
What do you make of the name Mary? Because Ralph has told me that the name Mary actually means bishop. It was a title rather than a name. Have you come across that before?
I have. Yes, it's the same as Miriam.
Yes, yes.
I could just look that up. I've got a wonderful thing called Abarim Publications. I hope I can do this and talk to you at the same time. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Rotten internet. We route through the telephone, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Miriam, let's see what Abarim say. I have heard that it means bishop or priestess. It's the same as where is it? Here we are, Miriam. Biblical Hebrew. Well, Abarim say it's the meaning is unclear, the etymology is unclear, but it means perhaps beloved, rebellion, or myrrhs, Myrrhs, and we know that Christ was presented with myrrh by the 3 kings.
Very interesting.
So I can't comment on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, so just to round up then, so am I right in saying that you now think that Heli was Jesus?
No, Healy was Mary's father, and he was the same as the Healy, father of Lud, who appears in Cambria Triumphans.
Right, okay. So we've got...
That's pure speculation, and I've no way of proving it. It's just that when you get 2 men of the same age at the right time with the same name, you're inclined to, rather like Brutus turns up in the Roman records at the right time, and then he disappears from the Roman records, and he turns up at the British records at exactly the right time, and he's described by Nennius as a Roman consul. Well, you've got the same man, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
But I need to do much more work on that before I can give that as anything other than a bonne bouche.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I very much look forward to hearing about that. So, if I'm getting this right, Edmund Marriage, he talks about the character Cymbeline, and the father of Cymbeline was. I have terrible trouble saying this for some reason.
Tenvantius.
Thank you very much.
The U is often a V, and I
Tenvantius,
either
yeah.
say Tenuantius or
Yes.
Tenvantius if you like. It's neither here nor there.
Yeah, Tenvantius is easier to
Yes.
pronounce, so we'll stick with
Yes.
that. So now this father, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember this word for word, but he had two sons taken away from him for some reason, and they were taken to Rome. And at some point after that, Cymbeline was entrusted with the sons of Augustus, and one of which was Cymbeline. So Edmund Marriage has Cymbeline as Augustus's son, and he was taken to England to study with the Druids, and he is saying that Cymbeline was in fact Jesus.
Yes, I'd love to. I'm going to try and find out more about that. I think it's pronounced, although we call it Cymbeline, I think it's pronounced Cymbelin, which is very close to the Welsh Cynfelin.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why there's a redundant E on the end, but it's like Dunfermline, which is not Dunfermline.
Yes.
You know, the spellings are a nightmare.
Mm.
It's you sometimes don't realize you're looking at the same name, but we talked about this briefly last week. There's a boy missing from there, and that's Arvaria, the traitor.
Right. Okay. Where's he on the genealogy?
He was one of Lud's sons. Do you remember I mentioned there's a group of statuary at St Dunstan's?
Yes.
That's Lud and two of his sons, who were both too young to take the throne. So Cassibelan took over as regent, I think, after Lud's death.
Okay. Right.
Such a lot to learn. I'm sorry if I don't sound as precise as I would like to be about this, but I'm still learning myself.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Right. Well, at some point in the future, I'm hoping that I can get you back on to discuss a little bit more on Helen and Constantine the Great.
Yes.
So I'd love to be able to dissect some of that history with you as well.
Well, so would I. It'd be very good practice for the biography. Is a really interesting thing I do know about Constantine is that he produced the most amazing sepulchre for his mother, and then went and died and was buried in it himself.
What do you think it would take for modern day historians to accept that Constantine and Helen were actually British? What would have to happen for that to transpire?
We just have to keep plugging away and producing our findings. I'm going to put up this paper about the early British Christians and the British royal family up on academia, and I don't have much of a reach, but people do read these things from time to time, and all one can do is be as sure of one's facts as possible, keep the speculation to a minimum, and keep putting our findings out there. And surely and slowly it will change. Now something has changed. Look, yes. Now look, when here's another what's his face, Heinrich Schliemann, when he discovered Troy. People had got to the stage of saying absolute nonsense, Troy never even existed. Well, he found it.
Yes.
And now, 130 years after he found it, it's accepted by the mainstream that Troy existed and it's there. I hope it doesn't take our history as long as that to become re-accepted, but we just have to keep plugging on. Absolutely. They do change eventually. We do have to be really rigorous rigorous in our scholarly approach to this, and not just, splurge it around and get cross about it because they don't listen. We have to be really rigorous, really scholarly, and be prepared to admit when we've made a mistake and correct it. I've no idea the number of mistakes I'm finding in the Great Migrations to correct them. But as I've said before, we are in the foothills of this rediscovery, and we're bound to. There are bound to be gaps, and we just plug on.
Okay.
That's all we can do at the moment.
Okay, Marshall. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed that. Hopefully, you'll come back in a few weeks' time, and we can.
I'd love to. Yes, I'd love to.
Yes,
there's
brilliant.
more to talk about. I haven't said anything like enough about the House of Pudens, which is a fascinating building. Now I've lost the thingy. Here we are. The House of Pudens in Rome. It's a lecture by John Henry Parker, which he gave to the Royal Archaeological Institute in 1871. And it's about the building. And the reason I'm so keen on this is because if anybody goes to Rome, you can actually go and walk in Craddock's footsteps still to this day.
Wow.
And you can walk in Gladys Claudia's footsteps and Paul's footsteps. Oh, by the way, did you know that he came to Cardiff Castle and wrote some triads there?
I've seen something about that on in R.W. Morgan's document on that. Definitely. Yeah. There's also a place, I'm trying to think where it is. Is it Bangor, where there was like a really big Druid kind of university, if you like? One of the bishops there was a guy, I think, called Pelagius. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Oh, yes, I'm a confirmed Pelagian. He didn't believe in original sin.
Yes,
he got kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church. He was a splendid man. Actually, Bangor actually means monastery in Welsh.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Fascinating. Marcel, I could talk to you all day.
Likewise.
I'm going to leave it there because we're approaching the hour. I'm back next week with a lady called Melissa Campbell, and we're going to be discussing Avebury and Stonehenge because she's somewhat of an expert on that. It's lovely to have ladies on board with all this history. So join me again next week. Marcel will be returning very soon, as will John Hart. And please like, share and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much for asking me. It's been grand once again. Thank you.
Cheers, Marcel.